My name is Elaine Carter. I'm 67 years old, and on the day my only son was supposed to marry, I walked into a church filled with more than 300 people and carried with me the one secret that could shatter everything. The air that afternoon was heavy with roses, a string quartet played softly, and the golden light from the stained glass washed over the pews where family, friends, and colleagues sat shoulder to shoulder. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my son Daniel's life. To everyone else, it looked perfect. To me, it felt like standing on the edge of a storm. I tightened the pearls around my neck, an heirloom passed down through 4 generations of women in my family. They were meant to be worn with pride, with love. On that day, they became my armor. I am not the kind of woman who enjoys making scenes. All my life, I've been the quiet one in the back of the room, the one who smooths things over so others don't feel uncomfortable. But that afternoon, I opened the side doors of St. Augustine Chapel with my chin lifted, knowing that every eye in the building would turn toward me. At the altar, Daniel stood tall, nervous but radiant, waiting for the woman he believed would become his wife. And just a few feet away, Lily Hart stood poised in her designer gown, her bouquet trembling ever so slightly in her hands. She hadn't seen me yet, but I knew the moment our eyes met, her perfect performance would begin to crack. I had chosen to walk straight into the storm, not because I wanted to, but because a mother's love sometimes leaves no other choice. And before I explain how it all came to this moment, I need to take you back 6 months earlier, when I still believed the story we were living was one of hope, not betrayal. 6 months before that day, my life was much quieter. My husband Richard had passed away 3 years earlier, and ever since, our home had carried a silence I could never quite fill. Daniel, my son, had always been the thoughtful type, but after his father died, he pulled further inward. He buried himself in work, in books, in routines that kept him safe from the world. I worried constantly. He was 34, and though he was successful, the spark that made him laugh so easily as a child seemed buried under layers of grief. I prayed often that something or someone might help him feel alive again. When Daniel finally introduced me to Lily Hart, I noticed a change almost instantly. His smile was lighter. His voice carried a brightness I had not heard since before the funeral. I wanted to believe this woman was the reason my son had finally begun to heal. Lily walked into my home that evening with polished grace. She carried herself as though she knew exactly how to make people feel comfortable. She spoke of her work as a pediatric nurse, of weekends spent volunteering with animals, of dreams to build a big family full of laughter and warmth. As she spoke, Daniel hung on her every word, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen in years: hope. As a mother, it touched me deeply. I thought, maybe this was the moment I had been waiting for. Maybe this was the answer to my silent prayers. I told myself to welcome her, not just as a daughter-in-law, but as a daughter, someone I could protect and cherish. Of course, there were little details that didn't fully add up even then, but at the time, I brushed them aside. When your child smiles again after years of darkness, you hold on to that light with both hands. Looking back now, I realize that was the first step into the whirlwind. What seemed like a gentle breeze of hope would soon grow into a storm I could never have imagined. Once the engagement was announced, the whirlwind truly began. Lily spoke often about the kind of wedding she dreamed of, and Daniel repeated her words as if they were his own. I wanted to see him happy, So I convinced myself that every request was just part of building the life he deserved. The venue alone came to $15,000. The gown she insisted on was a Vera Wang, priced at $12,000. She described wanting 2,000 roses flown in from Ecuador, so the church and reception hall would look like something from a fairy tale. Each detail sounded extravagant. But when I saw Daniel's joy, I told myself it was worth it. I opened check after check, pulling from the life insurance Richard had left, dipping into my savings, even taking out a loan against the house I had built with him. It felt heavy on my shoulders, but each time I hesitated, I remembered the way Daniel's eyes shined when Lily spoke. That light had been missing for too long, and I couldn't bring myself to snuff it out. Still, beneath the sparkle, cracks began to show. I noticed Lily always paid with cash. In a world where almost everything runs on credit or debit, it felt out of place. She told us different versions of her childhood, once saying she grew up on a farm in Iowa, another time saying she was raised in Chicago by her grandparents. I reminded myself not to judge too quickly, but the inconsistencies lingered. There were no photographs of her family, not even an old yearbook. She explained that her relatives had cut her off, and Daniel defended her, telling me it was too painful for her to revisit. As his mother, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust her. But deep down, I felt a quiet unease growing, like a shadow stretching longer with each passing day. Sometimes, when a story feels too perfect, it hides the truth. At that stage, I wasn't ready to admit it. I chose to silence the doubts and press forward, even as the cracks widened. And then came the moment that shattered every illusion, the afternoon when I accidentally heard the truth for myself. One Thursday afternoon, around 2 o'clock, I drove to Daniel's apartment. I had a box of small favors for the wedding guests, and I thought it might be a sweet surprise to leave them on his kitchen table before he came home from work. I still had a spare key, and it never crossed my mind that stepping inside would change everything. The apartment was quiet when I entered. I set the box down carefully, but as I turned toward the hallway, I froze. From the bedroom, I heard Lily's voice. Only it wasn't the gentle, polished tone I had grown used to. It was sharp, impatient, almost cruel. I stayed completely still, holding my breath as her words cut through the silence. She was talking to someone named Marcus, and what I heard made my stomach drop. She said the wedding was still on track, and once they were married, she would have access to the accounts. She complained about how much more money he wanted, and then I heard her mention me. She called me the old lady and said I had already given more than $4,000. She promised there would be more after the honeymoon. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. My knees weakened, and I had to lean against the wall to keep from sliding to the floor. I heard her laugh coldly, calling Daniel a fool, nothing more than a bank account to be emptied. I slipped out of the apartment as quietly as I could, my heart pounding in my ears. Once inside my car, parked a few blocks away, the weight of it all broke over me. The grief turned quickly into anger, and then into resolve. That day I realized I couldn't stay silent any longer. If Lily thought she could destroy my son and walk away, she had chosen the wrong family. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the pearls around my neck, still trembling from what I had overheard. I knew I couldn't face this alone. So, the next morning, I searched for private investigators in the area and found a woman named Denise Porter, a former detective with a reputation for being sharp and relentless. When I met her, I poured out everything: the quick engagement, the constant requests for money, the inconsistencies in Lily's stories, and finally, the phone call I had overheard. Denise listened carefully, her eyes steady in a way that made me feel both seen and judged. She told me what I had feared, but also what I needed to hear. This was classic romance fraud. People like Lily studied their targets. They learned exactly what you wanted most, and then they became that person. Her words left me hollow, but at the same time, they brought clarity. I wrote a check for her services, sliding it across the table with shaking hands. I asked her how long it might take to uncover the truth. She said that for someone careless enough to use her real voice on the phone, it wouldn't take long. She was right. Within days. Denise called me back with the confirmation that changed everything. Lily Hart didn't exist. The woman about to marry my son was actually named Sabrina Cole, 29 years old, originally from Texas. She had been arrested multiple times for fraud, with at least one conviction on record. Hearing her real name made my stomach turn. Suddenly, every sweet moment, every carefully rehearsed story, fell apart like glass. But Denise wasn't finished. She told me Sabrina rarely worked alone. There was a man tied to her past, a frequent accomplice, Marcus Lane. When Denise mentioned the name Marcus Lane, I felt a flicker of possibility. If Sabrina had hurt him the way she was hurting Daniel, perhaps he would want the truth exposed just as badly as I did. I sat at my kitchen counter with my phone in my hand for a long time before dialing his number. I half expected no one to answer, but when he finally picked up, his voice was rough, cautious, and worn down. I introduced myself and told him I was the mother of the man Sabrina was about to marry. For a moment, there was silence on the other end. And then, I could hear the heaviness in his breathing. He admitted that she had conned him out of $15,000 before disappearing from his life. He had spent months trying to find her, but never thought he'd hear her name again until now. I told him what I intended to do. I couldn't confront Sabrina in private. Daniel loved her too deeply, and he would never believe me unless the truth came crashing down in front of everyone. If Marcus was willing, we could end her act once and for all, right at the altar. He didn't hesitate. He said he would drive in on the day of the wedding, and he asked me to give him a signal when the time was right. That night, I also made quiet phone calls of my own, rerouting certain vendor payments back to the so-called family contacts Lily had given me. I wanted the cracks to start forming before the big reveal. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. The game she thought she was playing was about to turn against her. The morning of the wedding arrived gray and heavy with rain. Some people might have called it romantic weather, but to me, it felt like a warning. I woke before dawn, restless and certain that the day ahead would change everything for my son and for me. I slipped into a simple black dress, not festive, but deliberate. Around my neck, I fastened the same string of pearls Sabrina had once begged to borrow. They had belonged to my grandmother, my mother, and now to me. On that day, they were not an accessory. They were my reminder of who I was fighting for. By 1 o'clock, I parked a few blocks away from St. Augustine Chapel. A message buzzed on my phone from Marcus. He was already nearby, waiting for my signal. I felt a strange calm, knowing that no matter how chaotic things became, I wouldn't be alone in exposing her. Inside, the chaos was already brewing. I overheard staff whispering about missing payments, confused vendors trying to reach phone numbers that rang endlessly. My quiet redirection of the bills had done its job. At 2 o'clock sharp, Daniel walked down the aisle to stand at the altar, handsome in his tuxedo, radiating hope. Moments later, Sabrina appeared in her $12,000 gown, holding imported roses, and wearing my family's pearls against her skin. I slipped my phone from my purse and typed one word to Marcus now. The side doors of the chapel burst open with a sound that echoed through the vaulted ceiling. Every head in the room turned as Marcus Lane stepped inside. His suit still damp from the rain, his face grim and determined. I stayed still. My breath caught as he walked toward the aisle. His voice carried through the church, naming her not as Lily Hart, but as Sabrina Cole. The words rippled through the crowd like a wave. Daniel instinctively stepped closer to her, his confusion raw, but Marcus did not falter. I remember how time seemed to slow as Marcus pulled out a folder. He laid out photographs, one after another, images of Sabrina in Acapulco, caught in a credit card scam, another in Chicago pretending to be a cancer patient collecting donations, and more still in Tijuana, leaving a hotel room with someone else's wallet and watch. Each photo was like a hammer blow against the illusion she had built. Sabrina tried to gather herself, but her voice cracked. She tried to sound innocent, but panic edged every word. I saw the mask slipping, the perfect performance unraveling in front of 300 witnesses. Then came the final blow. Marcus pulled out his phone, and through the chapel, speakers played a recording of her voice, her real voice, the one I had heard in Daniel's apartment. Word for word, she boasted about how the old lady had already given her over $4,000, how my son was just a fool, how she would empty his accounts after the wedding. The sound of her own words filled the air, and there was no denying it anymore. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some gasped, others pulled out their phones to capture the moment. Daniel's face went pale as he turned toward her, searching her eyes for the truth and finding nothing but lies. I stood in the back, silent but steady, knowing the storm was finally breaking wide open. The church had fallen into a heavy silence after the recording ended, the weight of her words still hanging in the air. Daniel stood frozen at the altar, his face drained of color. I could see his fists clenched tightly at his sides, the reality of betrayal sinking in. And then, as if the moment had been waiting for its final act, the large wooden doors of the chapel opened once more. 2 federal agents stepped inside, their badges raised for all to see. Their voices were calm but firm as they declared Sabrina Cole under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Gasps erupted through the pews. Guests shifted, whispering in disbelief, while phones rose higher, recording every second. Sabrina struggled as the agents pulled her arms behind her, her perfect gown dragging along the aisle as the handcuffs clicked into place. She protested, insisting it was all a mistake, but the evidence had already spoken louder than her denials ever could. I watched from the back as she was led away, the pearls that had once been around her neck now safely tucked back into my purse. Justice did not feel triumphant. It felt steady, like rain finally reaching the ground after a long storm. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. After Sabrina was escorted out, the chapel remained suspended in uneasy silence. No one quite knew whether to leave or stay. Daniel stood at the altar, his tuxedo pressed and perfect, but his future shattered in front of 300 witnesses. Then, in a voice that was hoarse but steady, he told everyone the wedding was canceled. But he also reminded them the reception had already been paid for dinner, music, and an open bar were waiting. If people wished to stay, they were welcome. A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the room, breaking the tension just enough for people to shift, rise, and slowly begin talking again. Later, in the reception hall, something unexpected happened. The atmosphere changed from shock to warmth, without the burden of pretending. Guests shared food, conversation, and even small bursts of laughter. It felt more like a family gathering than a ruined wedding. I stood by the dessert table when Marcus approached me. His face was tired, but grateful. He thanked me for giving him the chance to face her, and I told him I could never have done it without him. In that moment, I realized we had both reclaimed something she had tried to take our dignity. That night, when I finally returned home, I placed the pearls back into their box and set them gently on my dresser. They had witnessed betrayal, heartbreak, and justice. As I sat with a cup of tea, I thought about what had unfolded. Love can blind us, even the wisest among us. My son wanted to believe in a dream, and I wanted it for him so badly that I ignored the cracks. That desire almost cost us everything. But sometimes, protecting the people you love means risking becoming the villain in their story, at least for a while. If my story touched you, I ask you to share it. Like this video, leave a comment telling me where you are watching from, and never forget real love protects, even when it hurts.